You are on Crazy Karen HOA. I shoveled. She documented. And the fight escalated. The plow ridge was taller than my knees, and Karen screamed that I was responsible for clearing it within 1 hour, and if I did not, the HOA vendor would do it and bill me triple. You are going to clear the steps, or I am posting a hazard notice. Monica King stood in my driveway at 6 in the morning, her breath coming out in angry clouds, waving a clipboard with a red strap tucked under her coat sleeve like it was a weapon. I am Jake, landscape irrigation tech for commercial properties around Portland, Oregon, and I had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift fixing broken pipe insulation at a shopping center when she ambushed me. The Snowcap Ridge Village Association had been on my case since November, but this was a new low. She pointed at the ridge the city plow left across my driveway apron and said I had 60 minutes to clear it or face a $500 fine plus triple vendor charges. I looked at her and said the city left that ridge, not me, and she cut me off. You should have read the rules before you moved in, sweetheart. She said it with a smile that made my skin crawl. The amendment passed in October states that all plow debris must be cleared within 2 hours of cessation of precipitation, and it has been 4 hours. I pointed out that I was at work all night and she shrugged. Your problem, not mine. She tapped her clipboard and said the vendor crew would arrive at 7 if I did not finish, and the bill would go straight to my account with interest. I asked what vendor, and she said that was confidential HOA business. I was too tired to argue, so I grabbed my shovel and started breaking up the ridge. My back was already screaming from the shift, and the snow was packed solid, full of gravel and ice chunks. Monica stood there watching me for 10 minutes, then she pulled out her phone and took photos. I asked what those were for, and she said documentation of non-compliance and visible safety hazards. I looked at the steps leading to my front door and realized she was talking about a small patch of ice near the bottom step. I told her I would salt it as soon as I finished the driveway, and she said that was not good enough. I will make an example out of you so everyone learns. That was her favorite line. She had said it twice already in the past month, once when I left my trash bin out 4 hours past collection, and once when a guest parked in a visitor spot overnight during Thanksgiving. Both times she hit me with fines that I was still contesting through the management company. Now she was using a snowstorm to escalate. She walked back to her Subaru and drove off, but not before yelling that she would be back at 7 to inspect. I finished the driveway ridge in 40 minutes, my shoulders burning, and then I dumped salt on the steps. I went inside, peeled off my jacket, and collapsed on the couch. My phone buzzed with an email from the Snowcap Ridge Village Association compliance system. Subject line: Violation. Notice pending. I opened it and saw a list of alleged infractions: failure to clear pedestrian path within regulatory window, presence of ice hazard on egress route, delayed response to verbal directive. It was all garbage, but the email said a formal hearing date would be assigned within 10 days unless I paid the fines up front. The total was $850. I called my neighbor Dennis, the only person in the neighborhood who had been willing to talk to me about the HOA nightmare. Dennis was retired, spent his mornings at the community mailbox cluster, and recorded every HOA meeting on his phone. He picked up on the second ring, and I told him what happened. He sighed and said Monica had been doing this to 3 other homeowners since the snow started. One guy got fined for not shoveling his roof overhang. Another got cited for ice dams on his gutter. Dennis said the board was terrified of slip and fall liability after someone ate it on the sidewalk last winter and threatened to sue. Monica used that fear to ram through a crazy enforcement checklist, and now she was working through the neighborhood one house at a time. I asked if anyone had pushed back, and Dennis said 2 people tried, and both got hit with lien packets, full of bogus line items and mystery fees. One of them was still fighting it in court. I asked what I should do, and Dennis said, "Document everything. Record every interaction, and do not give her an inch." He also told me to check the HOA governing documents because Monica had a habit of skipping required steps on purpose to speed up enforcement. I spent the next hour digging through the Snowcap Ridge Village Association rules on the resident portal. The enforcement policy was buried in a PDF from 2018. It said that before any fine could be issued, the homeowner had to receive written notice with a 10-day cure period, and any dispute had to go through a hearing with at least 2 board members present. Monica had given me a verbal threat and sent an email, but there was no formal written notice and no hearing date. She was jumping straight to fines. I took screenshots of the policy and saved them in a folder. I also started a recording app on my phone and made a note to keep it running anytime Monica showed up. I did not stop her because I wanted her on record. That was my plan. Let her dig her own hole while I collected proof. At noon I got another email. Subject line, vendor deployment notification. It said the HOA snow compliance contractor had been dispatched to my address to remediate outstanding violations, and I would be billed for services rendered. I looked out the window and saw my driveway was clear, the steps were salted, and there was nothing left to remediate. I called the management company and got voicemail. I left a message asking for clarification and a copy of the enforcement checklist Monica kept referencing. Then I grabbed my jacket and drove to the mailbox cluster to see if anyone else had been hit. The cluster was a small covered structure near the neighborhood entrance, and it was the unofficial courtroom where everyone traded complaints and rumors. 3 neighbors were standing there sorting mail, and I asked if they had heard about the compliance squad. One woman, Angela, laughed and said Monica had shown up at her house yesterday with 2 volunteers in reflective vests and clipboards. They told her that her walkway had a visible ice glaze and she needed to apply calcium chloride within 30 minutes. Angela said she asked to see their credentials and they looked at each other and left. She said one of them was Monica's sister-in-law. Another neighbor, Marcus, said he got fined $300 for leaving his trash bin on the curb for 6 hours after the truck came through. He said Monica personally came to his door and told him the fine was non-negotiable and he should pay it immediately to avoid lien action. Marcus said he filed a complaint with the management company and got a reply 2 weeks later saying the board had reviewed the matter and upheld the fine. He was planning to show up at the next HOA meeting and demand answers, but the meeting kept getting postponed because of the weather. I told them about the vendor deployment email, and Marcus shook his head. He said Monica had been using contractor intimidation, where she called the service providers directly and threatened to blacklist them if they did not cooperate with her enforcement agenda. One of the landscaping companies that did spring cleanup for half the neighborhood had dropped out after Monica told them she would pull their contract if they worked for anyone on her non-compliant list. I asked if anyone had recorded Monica saying any of this, and Angela said she had a doorbell camera that caught Monica threatening to put a lien on her property if she did not trim a tree branch that was technically on HOA common space. Angela said she saved the video but did not know what to do with it. I told her to keep it and send me a copy. I gave her my email and said I was building a file. Dennis showed up a minute later carrying a folder full of printed meeting minutes and said the next board meeting was scheduled for 2 days from now, assuming the roads were clear. He said Monica had been stacking the agenda with executive sessions to avoid public comment, but she could not block residents from attending. I said I would be there. Dennis said he would bring his recorder and sit near the front. That afternoon I got a knock on my door. I opened it and found a tow truck parked in my driveway with Monica standing next to it, waving her tow truck remote control like it was authority. She said my car was parked in violation of the snow emergency route designation, and it was being impounded. I looked at my sedan, which was parked in my own driveway, and said she was insane. She said the driveway crossed a designated emergency access zone, and any vehicle obstructing the zone during active snow conditions was subject to immediate removal. I asked where that rule was written, and she said it was in the Emergency Operations Addendum that was distributed in September. I never got any addendum, and I told her that. She said ignorance of the rules was not a defense, and she signaled to the tow driver. He started backing up the truck toward my car. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I said clearly that I was a homeowner parking in my own driveway, and there was no emergency access zone marked anywhere. Monica saw the phone, and her face changed. She said recording without consent was illegal, and I needed to stop. I said Oregon was a one-party consent state, and I was a party to the conversation, so she could either explain the rule or leave. She stared at me for 5 seconds, then told the tow driver to hold. She walked over and said if I was going to be difficult, she would escalate this to the board attorney, and I would be responsible for legal fees. I said go ahead. She turned and walked back to her Subaru, yelling at the tow driver to follow her. The truck pulled away and I stood there shaking. I went inside and uploaded the video to cloud storage. I also sent a copy to Dennis with a note asking him to keep it safe. That evening I got a certified letter slipped under my door. It was from the HOA attorney, a guy named Clark who apparently handled all the enforcement actions. The letter said I was in violation of multiple covenants and restrictions, and that the board was prepared to file a lien if I did not pay all outstanding fines within 7 days. The letter listed the fines: $850 for the snow violations, $300 for the trash bin, $250 for the guest parking incident, and $500 in administrative fees. The total was $1,900. There was also a line that said future violations would result in automatic lien filing and foreclosure proceedings. I read it twice and felt my blood pressure spike. I was trying to finish a repair before the weather changed and the HOA was blocking it. I had a delivery window for salt and sand, and if I missed it, stores would sell out. I needed to get the walkways and driveway prepped before the next storm hit in 48 hours, but Monica was creating constant distractions and threats that ate up my time and energy. I called a friend who worked in property law and asked if the HOA could actually foreclose over $1,900. He said technically yes, if the governing documents allowed it and the process was followed correctly, but most judges would laugh it out of court unless the amount was massive, or there was a pattern of non-payment over years. He said the bigger problem was that Monica could keep adding fees and interest until the amount became unmanageable, and fighting it would cost more in legal fees than just paying. He told me to get a lawyer or file a complaint with the management company immediately. I said I was already working on it and I had evidence that Monica was skipping steps. He said good, because selective enforcement and procedural violations were the easiest way to kill an HOA case. The next morning I woke up to 3 inches of new snow and my snowblower would not start. I tried the pull cord 6 times and got nothing but a cough and a puff of black smoke. I checked the spark plug and the fuel line and everything looked fine, but the engine was dead. I did not have time to troubleshoot, so I grabbed my shovel and started clearing the driveway manually. I was halfway done when Monica pulled up in her Subaru with her clipboard. She got out and said my failure to maintain operational snow removal equipment was proof I refused to comply with community standards. I told her the blower just died, and I was shoveling as fast as I could. She said that was not her problem, and she was filing an additional violation for delayed clearance. She took photos of the half-cleared driveway and the dead snowblower sitting in the snow, then she drove off. I finished shoveling, and went inside to thaw out. My phone buzzed with an email from Monica. Subject line: Final compliance warning. It said that my pattern of non-compliance had triggered the emergency enforcement protocol, and that the board was convening a special executive session that evening to discuss immediate remedies including fines, liens, and possible legal action. The email said I was not invited to the session because it was a closed board matter, but I would receive the decision in writing within 24 hours. I forwarded the email to Dennis and said this was it. They were going to try to ram through a lien without giving me a hearing. Dennis replied 5 minutes later and said he had just gotten off the phone with another board member, Linda, who was not part of Monica's inner circle. Linda told him that Monica had been pressuring the board to approve enforcement actions without proper notice or hearings, and that she was worried the HOA was opening itself up to massive liability. Linda said she was planning to vote no on any lien action until proper procedure was followed, but Monica had been working on the other board members to isolate her. If you are enjoying this crazy HOA snow saga, hit that like button and subscribe for more neighborhood justice stories. I decided I needed to go to that executive session, invited or not. I called Dennis and asked if he wanted to come with me, and he said absolutely. He also said Angela and Marcus were in, and that Linda had quietly told him the meeting was at Monica's house at 7. I spent the rest of the day organizing my evidence. I had screenshots of the enforcement policy showing the required notice and hearing steps. I had the video of Monica threatening to tow my car from my own driveway. I had the emails showing she was skipping procedure and hitting me with fines before any hearing. I also had a copy of the enforcement policy showing Karen was skipping required steps on purpose, and I printed a second copy to bring to the HOA attorney, so the legal risk was obvious. That was my trump card, and I was ready to deploy it. At 6:30, Dennis picked me up and we drove to Monica's house on the other side of the neighborhood. Angela and Marcus met us in the driveway, and we walked up to the front door together. I rang the bell and Monica answered. Her face went from surprise to anger in half a second. She said the meeting was closed and we needed to leave. I said the governing documents required open meetings unless the board was discussing personnel or litigation, and this was an enforcement matter that affected multiple homeowners. She said I was wrong and tried to close the door. Dennis wedged his foot in and said we were not leaving, and that if she wanted to call the police, we would be happy to explain why the board was violating its own rules. Monica stared at us, then stepped back and let us in. The board was sitting in Monica's living room. Monica, 2 other members named Jeff and Carol, and Linda. There were papers spread out on the coffee table and a laptop open with a spreadsheet. I recognized my name on one of the rows. Monica said we had 2 minutes to state our business, and then we had to leave. I said I was here to contest the fines and the lien threat, and that the board was violating its own enforcement policy by skipping the required notice and hearing steps. I pulled out my printed copy of the policy and handed it to Linda. Linda read it and looked at Monica. She said Jake is right, we cannot fine anyone without written notice and a hearing. Monica said the email counted as written notice, and the executive session was the hearing. Linda said that was not how it worked, and that the policy was clear. Jeff and Carol looked uncomfortable. Monica said I was wasting everyone's time, and that the violations were documented and the fines were justified. I said the violations were bogus, and that she was targeting me because I pushed back. I pulled out my phone and played the video of her threatening to tow my car from my own driveway. The room went silent. Linda watched the whole thing and then said this is a serious problem. Jeff said we need to talk to the attorney before we do anything else. Carol said she wanted to see the enforcement checklist Monica had been using. Monica said the checklist was a working document and not subject to board review. Linda said that was ridiculous and that everything the compliance chair did was subject to board oversight. The argument escalated and I realized Monica was losing control of the room. Dennis pulled out his phone and said he had been recording HOA meetings for the past 6 months, and he had audio of Monica admitting she was using enforcement to make examples out of people who questioned her. He said he also had recordings of her bragging about making homeowners pay inflated vendor fees and pocketing kickbacks. Linda said play it. Dennis hit play, and we heard Monica's voice from a meeting in November. "I will make an example out of you so everyone learns." That was her line, and she had said it to at least 3 people on the record. Then there was another clip where she told Jeff that the vendor contracts were none of his business, and that she had relationships that brought value to the HOA. Jeff's face went pale. He said, "Are you taking money from vendors?" Monica said no, and that Dennis had edited the recordings to make her look bad. Dennis said the files had timestamps and metadata, and he would be happy to turn them over to an independent reviewer. Linda stood up and said this meeting is over, and we are not voting on anything tonight. She said the board needed to hire an independent auditor to review all of Monica's enforcement actions and vendor contracts, and that no further fines or liens would be issued until the review was complete. Carol agreed. Jeff said he wanted to resign effective immediately because he did not sign up for this. Monica said they were all overreacting and that I was manipulating them. Linda said no, you have been manipulating us, and it is stopping now. Monica grabbed her clipboard with the red strap and said, "Fine, do whatever you want, but when the lawsuits start coming because people are slipping on ice, do not come crying to me." She walked out of her own living room and slammed a door. Linda looked at me and said, "I am sorry this happened." She said the board would send me a formal letter rescinding all fines pending the audit, and that if the audit found procedural violations, I would be refunded any payments I had already made. I said I had not paid anything and I was not going to. She said that was fine. She also said the board was going to ask the management company to place Monica on a no-contact directive until the review was complete. I thanked her and we left. On the drive home, Dennis said he had more recordings, including one where Monica told another board member that she was targeting me specifically because I worked nights and she thought I was lazy. He said he had been sitting on the recordings for weeks waiting for the right moment, and tonight was it. I asked why he did not just release them earlier, and he said because he wanted to catch her in the act of skipping procedure and violating homeowner rights, so the evidence was undeniable. He said a few mean comments were not enough to force change, but a pattern of procedural abuse and possible financial misconduct was. I realized Dennis had been playing a long game, and I was just one piece of it. The next morning I got an email from the management company. Subject line: Board Action Notification. It said that effective immediately, all enforcement actions initiated by the compliance chair were suspended pending an independent audit, and that any homeowner who had been fined in the past 6 months could request a review. It also said that Monica King had been placed on administrative leave from her board duties and was prohibited from contacting homeowners directly. The email included a contact for the auditor and a deadline to submit documentation. I forwarded it to Angela and Marcus and told them to file requests. Angela replied and said she already did. 2 days later, the storm hit. 6 inches of new snow overnight. I got up early and shoveled my driveway and walkway, salted everything, and cleared the apron where the plow would leave another ridge. I took photos and timestamped them. At 8, Monica drove past my house slowly, staring at my driveway, but she did not stop. I waved. She did not wave back. That afternoon, Dennis called and said the auditor had requested all of Monica's enforcement files and vendor contracts, and that the management company was cooperating fully. He said the auditor also wanted to interview homeowners who had been fined, and I was on the list. I said I would talk to anyone who wanted to listen. The interview happened 3 days later over Zoom. The auditor was a woman named Karen, which was ironic, but she was professional and thorough. She asked me to walk through every interaction I had with Monica, every email, every fine notice, every threat. I showed her the video of the tow truck incident and the recordings Dennis had shared with me. She took notes and said my case was one of the clearest examples of procedural violation she had seen. She also said she had found irregularities in the vendor contracts and that at least 2 of the companies Monica used had no business license on file with the state. She said the board was looking at potential fraud and that they were considering bringing in law enforcement. A week later, the management company sent out a notice that a special meeting had been called to address the audit findings and vote on board leadership changes. The meeting was scheduled for the community center on a Saturday morning, and all homeowners were invited to attend. Dennis said it was going to be a bloodbath and that Monica had been trying to rally support by sending private emails to homeowners, claiming she was being unfairly targeted. He said most people were ignoring her. The morning of the meeting, I drove to the community center and found the parking lot packed. Inside, the main room was standing room only. Dennis had saved me a seat near the front. Linda was at the head table with Carol and a guy I did not recognize, probably a management company rep. Monica was sitting in the back, with her arms crossed, her clipboard with the red strap on her lap. The meeting started, and Linda read a summary of the audit findings. The auditor had identified 23 procedural violations across 15 enforcement actions, including failure to provide written notice, failure to hold hearings, and improper use of vendor services. The auditor also found that Monica had approved payments to 2 vendors without board authorization, and that one of the vendors was owned by her brother-in-law. The total amount of improper payments was over $12,000. The room erupted. People started yelling questions. One guy stood up and said he had been fined $800 for a tree branch and wanted his money back. Another woman said Monica had threatened to foreclose on her house over a mailbox placement issue. Linda banged a gavel and said everyone would have a chance to speak, but the board needed to vote first. She said the board was voting to remove Monica from the compliance chair position effective immediately and to refer the vendor payment issue to law enforcement for investigation. Carol seconded. The vote was unanimous. Monica stood up and said, "You are all going to regret this." Linda said the board was also voting to adopt an enforcement checklist that limits tactics like unannounced vendor deployments, verbal-only warnings, and threats of immediate lien action without hearings. The new checklist required written notice, a 10-day cure period, and a hearing with at least 2 board members before any fine could be issued. Carol seconded. The vote was unanimous. Monica walked out. The room stayed tense, but the energy shifted. People started lining up at the microphone to tell their stories. Angela talked about the compliance squad showing up with clipboards and no credentials. Marcus talked about the trash bin fine and the threat of a lien. I talked about the tow truck incident and the video I recorded. Every story added to the pile, and it became clear that Monica had been running a personal enforcement empire with no oversight. Linda said the board would be issuing refunds to everyone who had been improperly fined, and that the process would start within 30 days. She also said the board was looking for a new compliance chair and that the position would have strict oversight and reporting requirements. After the meeting, Dennis and I walked out to the parking lot. He said that was the most satisfying thing he had seen in years. I agreed. Angela caught up with us and said she had just gotten an email from the management company saying her fine had been reversed and a refund check would be mailed within 2 weeks. Marcus got the same email, I checked my phone, and I had one too. The total refund was $1,900 plus interest. I felt a weight lift off my chest. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the HOA attorney, Clark. It said that after reviewing the audit findings, his firm was terminating its relationship with the Snowcap Ridge Village Association due to concerns about board governance and potential liability. The letter also said that any enforcement actions he had signed off on were being withdrawn pending re-review by new counsel. I showed it to Dennis and he laughed. He said Clark probably realized he had been signing off on Monica's procedural violations and did not want to get sued for malpractice. A month later, the board held elections. Linda ran for president and won. Carol stayed on as treasurer. 2 new members joined, including Marcus. The new board hired a new management company that specialized in community governance and transparency. One of their first actions was to publish all enforcement policies and vendor contracts on the resident portal so everyone could see them. They also created a homeowner dispute resolution process that required mediation before any fines could be issued. The neighborhood started to feel normal again. Monica moved out in March. I heard from Angela that she sold her house and relocated to Seattle. No one threw a going-away party. The new compliance chair was a retired teacher named Bob who believed in talking to people before writing citations. He knocked on my door one morning in April to introduce himself and ask if I had any concerns about common area maintenance. I said no, everything was fine. He said good, and if I ever had an issue, I should call him directly. I said I would. The refund check arrived in May. $1,900 plus $63 in interest. I deposited it and used part of the money to buy a new snowblower for next winter. I also bought a better doorbell camera and made sure it had cloud storage. Dennis told me I was smart to stay prepared because HOAs never really change, they just cycle through different personalities. I said maybe, but at least now we had precedent and people knew they could push back. In June, the new board sent out a newsletter summarizing the changes. They highlighted the new enforcement checklist, the vendor oversight policy, and the dispute resolution process. They also included a note that said the board had adopted a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and intimidation by board members, and that any homeowner who felt targeted could file a complaint with the management company that would trigger an automatic review. The newsletter ended with a reminder that the HOA existed to serve the community, not the other way around. I kept a copy on my fridge. Dennis told me that Linda had quietly reached out to the other homeowners Monica had targeted and helped them file complaints with the management company that triggered discipline for procedural violations. He said at least 5 people got refunds and 2 others got formal apologies. He also said the vendor investigation found enough evidence of self-dealing that the management company referred it to the district attorney, but he did not know if anything would come of it. I said even if nothing happened legally, the fact that Monica was gone and the board had new rules was enough. Dennis agreed. The next winter was calm. Snow fell, I shoveled, I salted, and no one bothered me. Bob sent out reminder emails before storms with tips on safe clearing practices and links to discount salt suppliers. The neighborhood group chat, which had been toxic during Monica's reign, turned into a place where people shared snowblower recommendations and offered to help elderly neighbors with walkways. It felt like a real community again. I ran into Angela at the mailbox cluster in January, and she said she could not believe how different things were. I said it just took one person being held accountable and everyone else realizing they did not have to put up with abuse. She said amen to that. In February, I got a message from Linda asking if I would be interested in joining the compliance committee as a homeowner representative. She said the new structure required non-board volunteers to review enforcement actions before they went to fines, and she thought I would bring a good perspective. I thought about it for a day and said yes. I figured if I was going to live here, I might as well help make sure the rules were applied fairly. My first meeting was in March. We reviewed 3 cases: a fence height issue, a mailbox paint color dispute, and a complaint about a barking dog. In every case, we talked to the homeowner first, explained the rule, and gave them time to fix it. No fines, no threats, no clipboards with red straps. It was boring and reasonable and exactly what it should have been. Dennis retired from recording meetings after the election. He said he had done his part and it was time to let the new board prove itself. He still showed up to meetings occasionally, but he left his phone in his pocket. I asked if he missed the drama and he said not even a little. He said the best thing about the whole situation was that it proved homeowners could win if they stuck together and documented everything. I said I learned that the hard way. The compliance committee met every month through the spring and summer. We handled a dozen cases, all minor, all resolved without fines. In August, we reviewed the enforcement stats from the past year and compared them to the year before. Under Monica, the HOA had issued over 40 fines, totaling $60,000. Under the new system, we had issued 0 fines and resolved every issue through conversation and compliance assistance. Linda presented the stats to the board and they voted to make the new process permanent. The neighborhood was proof that enforcement could be fair and still effective. I still see Monica's house sometimes when I drive past. The new owners are a young couple with a toddler. They put up a swing set in the backyard and planted flowers in the front bed. The house looks happy. I wonder if they know the history, but I never asked. Some stories are better left in the past. In December, a year after the whole mess started, I was clearing my driveway after the first big snow of the season when Bob pulled up in his truck. He got out and asked if I needed help. I said I was good. He looked at the clean driveway and the salted walkway and said it looked great. He also said he wanted to thank me for serving on the compliance committee because my perspective had helped shape the new policies. I said I was happy to help. He said the board was planning a neighborhood appreciation event in the spring and he hoped I would come. I said I would. He drove off, and I finished shoveling. That evening, Dennis called and said he had heard through the grapevine that Monica had tried to join an HOA board in Seattle and got rejected after the management company called Snowcap Ridge for a reference. Linda had told them the truth, and they passed. Dennis said karma was real, and it was patient. I said I would drink to that. The neighborhood settled into a rhythm. Winters came and went, snow fell, and we cleared it. The rules were still there, but they were applied with common sense and fairness. The compliance committee kept meeting and kept resolving issues without drama. The board stayed transparent, and the homeowners stayed engaged. It was not perfect, but it was functional, and that was more than enough. I learned that the HOA was only as good or as bad as the people running it, and that one person could make a huge difference. For better or worse. Monica had made it worse, and we made it better. That was the story. Thanks for watching, and I will be back soon.